to the panel. Do we have Catalin? I saw Catalin earlier. And Tobin and Peter. They're waiting to see their faces. There you go. Excellent. All right. So, Matthew, I'm going to stick with you. The example you just showed up there, I'm not going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. You can read. So, is that kind of user flow? Is that actually happening now? Is it earning you revenue? What's the status?
Age verification through the mobile phone networks, at least in the UK, where it's been available for a little longer than the rest of the world, is in use and revenue generating. In terms of the rich user flow or decision-based user flow that you're seeing, that's in trial, but not in production. And it comes down to education. The reason we built that was to evidence how much more you can do if you're willing to orchestrate your journeys. And at a point, if that fails, you'd go to age verification or estimation or biometric or some other form. But it's all about beginning the journey of bringing the market to understand what's possible.
What's the feedback like from customers and potential customers when you bring them this solution?
I mean, it resonates because, seeing it written down, even seeing in an API spec, unless you're a developer, it makes no real sense. So visualizing it has really helped us gain understanding, recognition, and also interest. And when it comes to feedback, age verification through the mobile phone is a valid point as part of a journey. But it isn't the silver bullet, sadly, because, as we've discussed, nothing really is. And mobile data is as good as it is useful in a low-friction environment, but it needs more. So in that sense, you're always discussing and, to a point, arguing with customers, it has a place and you should use it. And then it's a case of those customers who are willing to use it.
Catalin, you're in a similar space of number verification. What's been your experience of live customer rollouts?
It definitely sees traction and interest, and I think that the point that I like to highlight, and Matt demonstrated really well, I think what's powerful here is how network APIs are combined with phone number intelligence. If I take a simple example, account takeover as a risk, as a fraud, so there are two ways of doing that. SIM swap is a way of doing that, and then porting the number to another carrier is another way of doing that. So you combine these two solutions, one originates in the network API space, one originates in the traditional number intelligence space, and then you have a full solution to essentially mitigate this type of fraud. So I think this is the power, when you combine these two, to have a more complete solution that enterprises are seeing as helping them resolve the entire set of problems.
Tobin, tell us about Keyless so that the audience know where you fit into this.
Yes, thank you, Tim. We're Keyless, and we provide 100% privacy-preserving facial biometric authentication. So that is logging in, step-up authentication, payments with your face, essentially. And now, one of the special things about the way Keyless do it is that we bind the facial biometric template to the device, but the biometric templates don't leave the device at any time. So we can't access the biometric templates. Our customers can't either. And that is what things like GDPR love, because biometric data is its own special category of PII. That's Keyless.
Is the technology similar to iProov?
No, ours is much better.
Damn it.
Now he's going to tell you lots of lies. Don't listen to him.
On the surface, very similar idea. As a user, take a selfie, and then we do the I assume similar sorts of checks. Then iProov specifically focus on liveness, so ensuring that it's a real person, that it's the person we expect it to be, and that they're there right now. We have two levels of assurance. So we have our Express product, and then we have our dynamic liveness product. And dynamic liveness is where we really differentiate ourselves from the market. This has a particular passive process of flashing some lights at you as you do the liveness, so it's known as our flash mark, and that adds additional data for us and an additional level of assurance that means that we can carry EIDAS level of assurance high, and we work with lots of government agencies and those, because it's the product that you use when you really can't afford for there to be any chance of a false acceptance.
Why do the multiple flashing lights prove liveness so well?
So it gives us. There's a couple of key things that it gives us. The first one is it protects against replay attacks. The lights. It's a random and unique sequence of colours for each person for each transition they have with us, and so we can easily tell then if it's if a replay attack happens. But also those lights give off a very specific set of reflections from skin versus screens versus bits of paper versus masks, and we've trained our AI models to look for that and recognise the live human response from skin, from eyes, and that type of thing. So it just gives us it's not. We don't rely only on that, but it gives us another set of unique signals for us to be able to test against.
So the title of this session is Biometrics and Authentication, and in a sense, network APIs are a kind of biometric, aren't they? Because they're like a behavioural, in the sense that you may be moving from one location to another. It tracks what you've just done, activities you've done. It's kind of a biometric. So how do the Tobin? How would the two work together? Are they presumably facial biometrics and network APIs are perfectly complementary technologies?
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think the collaboration slide was a great one, obviously, and I think as a group of vendors, we're much more interested, or we sit against, if that's the right term, passwords and SMS OTP far more than each other. I think that those are sometimes the cheaper way to do things, but they're inherently less secure, I think we'd all argue. So in terms of how they sit together, I think it always depends on the use case, right? So there are times where we both argue that very quick selfie for certain, it can be very secure, especially once the device is known. I think where it would work excellent and does work excellently together is where the user loses their device. So we've got a very powerful component at that point where we recognize the face still, but you have to pair that with something else, right? Because we always talk in Keyless about the evil twin scenario, right? That's a very difficult one for us to defend against. Once you've got device and face, we're fine, but when the user then loses their device, that's where things like the number intelligence and detecting SIM swap and things like that becomes a really powerful combination for that kind of lost device scenario.
Matthew, how are you incorporating, facial biometrics, human fingerprints, whatever?
Yeah,
are you incorporating that into your solutions?
Not yet, no, and broadly because many of our customers or channel partners are doing that in a sense.
Right.
What we're trying to do is educate and drive more of that, because the industry is changing around us in many respects. So we're seeing regulation, particularly in Asia, driving changes towards replacing one-time passwords through SMS, through other technologies. We're seeing that even network APIs are good, but they're not keeping pace. And as a consequence, other technologies are being presented. Passkeys are the de facto now as a recommendation, as an alternative to those methods. There are equally good solutions available through the mobile services and in partnership with biometric authentication providers. They're just not being seen or recognized. So our interest is to drive that understanding in the market so we can understand passkeys are great, but they're not also the solution. But the solution is part of a bit of everything, in a sense.
Catalin, I'm sure yesterday's conference discussed this. I wasn't there, but it discussed this at length, the one-time password, how important that's been to the market, and how we're now starting to see perhaps the beginning of the end for that, or certainly an evolution of it. What's your sense of where that market is at now and how these new ideas are impacting it?
Yeah, we are clearly at the crossroad, and we've seen with Nick Lane's presentations, over the past couple of years, how the trend and the mood is shifting. And I think, the decrease of A2P SMS traffic in general and of the authentication use case in particular is something that can no longer be, negated. It's happening, and it's driven, either by regulation in many countries, it's driven by increased prices, it's driven by fraud, but this is something that's beyond any debate, I think, at least in most geographies. I think the interesting question is, is there going to be one technology that's going to be merged, or is it more like a mix of technologies? And I think it's going to be more the latter. There are pros and cons for a lot of things. Network APIs are great, but the coverage is still, a handful of countries, a dozen countries or so. If you're looking at full country coverage, it's increasing, but, there are also immediate solutions that are needed. Passkeys, again, great, but not everybody is tech savvy to even set up a password. So, or RBM, I should, maybe even speak about RBM. Google has shifted their, most of their OTP authentication to other channels, and RBM is one of them. It's, yeah, so I guess that's going to be the interesting aspect over the next 1 or 2 years. How is OTP SMS going to be replaced? What's going to be the actual channels?
And what is your business model for monetizing this number verification and network APIs? Is it per message, or is it like a software as a service model?
It's usage related, right? So it's per authentication, per message, depending on the exact channel. Yeah.
And Matthew, what's your models?
Yeah, it's very much the same because it's dictated by the mobile networks, and they all like a good transactional charge. I think in the future, what's definitely recognized is that as we move towards this world of continuous authentication or verification or whatever other term you want to use, is we will ultimately move towards subscription models. We're just not quite there. And they'll be based on the authorization or authentication journey being paid for as a whole sum, rather than the component pieces. And that will be far more valuable than the individual transactions, but going on that journey is a hard one, because it's easier to see transactions and the scale of those right now.
What are the dangers with this form of authentication? I mean, I'm sure when one-time passwords were invented, no one really thought about SIM swaps in social engineering at that point. They probably thought it was very robust. So without sort of being too negative or giving out the any nightmare scenarios, where are the risks?
I think the risks have been the users not really understanding it firstly. So, but forget the cybersecurity issues for a moment. It's not been user friendly in its first version, which is why you've heard today a number of reasons why it hasn't really got the stronghold it could have. And it's been down to channel partners like us and netnumber and others to make that better, to build around a good but poor solution. What's great, as you heard from Adri earlier today, is we are now moving into a 2.0 world, in a sense, where it's getting better. The journey I showed you, I typed in a phone number. Adri showed you a world where you don't have to, and that is on the horizon. So that starts to make it even more secure, because at that point, I can't attempt to impersonate someone because it's doing it in the background. So a lot of the challenge has been really to get people to understand it and then to use it, and for it to be effectively invisible to a point to the user. And then beyond that, it's really come down to layering of the different types of technologies, the different types of network APIs, because even if we move to a world of tokenization and wallets are secure, but they also can be moved around. And how do you know when they're moving around, or when they're no longer on a secure device, or that secure device is breached? It's all about bringing all that technology together, and it's about that layer of orchestration that's going to be critical. And I think we're just at the beginning of understanding that, and the carriers are slowly starting to play their place in making it more accessible, and then we can identify the threats, because it's not in use enough to know what they really genuinely are.
Right. So you talked about wallets there. It's a good time to segue into that. Peter, I mean, yourself and Andrew are very deeply embedded in some of these national wallet initiatives. What do you think how will the facial authentication, what role will that play in some of when they start rolling out?
Yeah, so to say, I think the importance of things like putting more and more important and private and valuable data onto your phone and having that be the access point is it becomes more and more important that you ensure that the person accessing the phone is the person you expect it to be, and isn't someone that's picked up the phone, or isn't someone who's impersonating that person in some way, be that some sort of presentation attack or some sort of injection attack. And so services like ours, that's what we specialize in. It's not about just matching faces. We do that, but that's very much a table stakes piece. It's really about ensuring that it is the right person that you expect it to be, so that you have a fully secured system to the individual, not just to a device that's owned by the individual. That's also important, being able to link them to that specific device, but even that connection doesn't sort of make it fully secure. And although we have biometrics on phones in the sense of sort of face IDs and fingerprints and those sorts of things, even those are really only there to make it an easier system to use. It's an easier way of entering your PIN, because they always fall back to being your PIN. So even if them as biometrics are entirely secure, and they're not, my son regularly logs into my phone through his face, but even if they were incredibly secure, the fact is he, my wife, other members of my family know my PIN, and so can access that phone. Off-device liveness solutions that we offer are much more secure and are really checking for that. They're not just easy ways to enter your PIN.
Tobin, Peter just talked about injection attacks there, and earlier on Andrew was saying that they're the biggest threat. It's much more of a threat than masks or, people presenting a photo or a video. So how do you protect against those kinds of attacks?
Yeah, like injection attacks are like the battle line for sure. And iProov have got a great system using the flashing lights. The way we approach it, like I mentioned earlier, is getting that device binding, because that means that you have to have the user's device as well to carry out that double-factor authentication. That's very difficult to steal someone's device and make a deep fake of it and get past our jail detection solution. Plus, we've got models checking for deep fakes as well. So there's a lot of steps in order to get that. That doesn't mean that we can get too relaxed about it. Like there's still a lot of work to be done. But yeah, as long as we have those other layers still in place, and we still do, then we're in a good place. There's a lot of noise about deepfakes at the moment, and a lot of the panels I'm on end up coming back to here because it's all over LinkedIn at the moment. And all I'd say to that is, beyond the fact that we have those different layers of protection, is it's a problem that we've actually been facing in the industry for far longer than the last 3 to 6 months that it's kind of exploded on LinkedIn. It's something we've been kind of working towards and sort of preparing ourselves. What's changed is that it's become cheaper to generate, and the videos look cooler on LinkedIn, and people think, oh, I can use ChatGPT, so I could make one of those. But realistically, fraudsters have been well on top of this technology for a while.
And a bigger challenge with that as well is the perception that deepfake is one thing, and it's not. There are so many different ways of producing and injecting a deepfake attack that we need to be on top of all of those, that entire spectrum, and it just keeps moving. As you say, it's exploded recently, but what that means is there's more tools, there's more opportunity, and they're very, very scalable attacks. And so keeping a very strong defense against that and continuing to evolve the systems and stay ahead of the game.
There's been an upside of there's more data for us as well to test against, and that's getting cheaper for us as well. So the data and availability for the fraudsters is also more and more data and cheaper for us as well. So
the one thing that we haven't talked about today, I know Andrew talks about this a lot in his presentations, is the pros and cons of on-device facial authentication versus having some kind of cloud element. I know you use a cloud element to yours. Can you talk about why that is preferable to just going to the Apple route and getting Apple to do all your authentication on the device?
As I say, I think there's the fact that ours is continually updated. I'm sure Apple are doing things as well, but Apple releases are potentially less frequent. As I was saying earlier, the main use of Face ID is really to make it easier to enter your PIN, and so the fallback is very easy to get around. You can always fall back to PIN, so you can always enter the PIN. Solutions like ours don't have that as the fallback.
Yeah, and it becomes useless as soon as you lose that device, right? It's set per device, and and that's a sort of security thing and a data security thing, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But solutions like ours are for genuine identity assurance throughout the time that you are engaging with that customer, and you can always make sure you're authenticating back to that same person, which the local biometric can't do by its very nature and design.
Yeah, and similarly, it's to say we with ours you can also use it across multiple devices and on your desktop, those sorts of things. So it's not you can rebind, but you can also use it across that same biometric across many different devices. The on-device biometric is contained to that single device.
To go back to number intelligence and sort of invisible telco verification, what's the pushback that you're getting, Catalin, if you're trying to talk to a customer and persuade them to use your solution? Is it cost? Is it legacy technology? How are they responding if it's in a negative way?
Yeah, it's a couple of things. So I think it's easier when you deal with a brand that's active in a given market that's well covered by network APIs. It's more difficult when you deal with global brands and they want to roll out something that's available across other markets they're present with. And as I mentioned earlier, the coverage still has to grow to get to that level. Luckily, there are other elements of number intelligence that can be used as a failover or as an alternative. So here is the value of packaging this together, network APIs and number intelligence, to offer a broader solution. But that's one of the objections. Yeah, cost is a heated topic, and it depends, how you count and how you measure. Often the OTP SMS cost is taken as a reference for good or for bad. And not always the network API cost is at the same lower level, but it has some other advantages, right? In terms of AIT protection, in terms of the number of retries. So the network APIs provides overall, in my opinion, a better return on investment. But still, on the first cost discussion, you have this pushback when this gets compared.
Okay, we've got 5 more minutes left. Do we have any questions from the audience? Is that Mary again? Yeah. The furthest away from the mic. Just shout.
Well, let me go back to that.
Do you want this one?
Came up a few minutes back. I'll just go over. I just noticed that a lot of the conversation was focused on the types of attacks that are incoming, and I noticed this has kind of been across the day, so it's not just about your guys' conversation, but it struck me at a moment. And I'm also concerned, though, about the resilience to the users when they're trying to get something fixed or corrected. How do people engage with the mobile support? Do they engage with your support? When something's going wrong, but from the user perspective, and you want more resilience, because I've actually had face recognition technology not work over and over and over again with an account where I could get a hold of nobody. Where I mean, luckily I found something in some old thing that I was able to get into that account because it was a big deal to not have it work. But I'm starting to think about these things as we're talking about this. I have 2 passports. I have 2 different names. I have multiple mobile devices that are real. All of these things make my life more difficult. But you know what? There's a lot of people in this world that are not fitting neatly into one jurisdiction, one mobile phone, one everything. And so when something comes up, how do these things, how are we thinking, or how are you all thinking about, at least, the support on the other side, the ability to not get stuck as a customer?
I'll take one of the points at the start. So I think, and hopefully you don't mind me speaking across, so I've been on the buyer side of this. I used to work for a consumer investment app, and we were relying on email OTP and passwords for a long time, and our overall cost of authentication in the business was huge. Password resets, emails not coming through, painful, and also account takeover was rife as well. Okay, bad situation. When you implement better solutions, it actually frees up a lot of resources for some of these edge cases. So I think me and Peter would both say, yeah, you do sometimes end up with someone whose face for for whatever reason is no longer matching. It's a low rate, but it happens. But actually, in terms of our customers, they then feel like they have resource for someone to call up and them to authenticate over the phone and get them reset and redo the biometric. And that overall, their costs are, and they can take their time on that support it. That's the argument I'd make.
I think maybe, and maybe this is going back to the regulatory question that was asked earlier, because I see it not going that way. I see the customer support resources going down and down and down, pushing that off to bots and not really getting the support. So I'm actually, it's an area of concern, because it seems like aggregating this thing down, finding cost savings by companies not choosing to have that, oh, we can get around it now. I don't know, it keeps coming up, but I like I said, I'm a special weird case in some ways, so maybe I just hit all the problems.
I mean, certainly on our side, generally we're a component in someone else's service, and so they will be the first line on that. But as ours is a service rather than software that they're running, we're running that on their behalf all the time. Then we do have a support service that it can come back to, and we have real people there, real humans, sort of managing that and handling those cases. So I would hope that we have a solution. And I think not all biometrics are created equal. I mean, clearly, we have very good ones, but there, as with everything in life, there are better solutions, there are worse solutions, there's better support, there is worse support. So.
Okay. Yes, one question for Nemesis.
Yeah. So you talked about Apple biometrics, or the device biometrics. Anyway, I'd like to understand a bit more how you see that competition. Let's say, right. So obviously Apple has the platform and Google, so they have a lot of reach. But would you say you rely on having better technology? Because I didn't actually get the point you made earlier about the biometric itself, right? So I don't think Apple biometrics are good. I wouldn't compare it with iProov. We used iProov on Firo at some point as a subcontractor. It's very good. I think you got a lot of good stuff going with deepfakes too. But how would you compare that against Apple? Because the example you made is Apple will fall back to PIN. But that's a simple thing to change. Actually, there are some use cases. I don't remember what. I think it was payment recently. I was trying to pay for something for a large amount, and it didn't fall back to PIN. So it's simple change, right? So how do you see that together with all the signals they have, right? Because they have a bunch of signals on me.
So I think it's totally got its place. Obviously it does, right? Yeah. But I think Peter put it like it's for unlocking the device, and it cannot. So if you've gone through a KYC process, and then you get a brand new device, there's no way of saying that the biometric that was collected to pass KYC is still the biometric of the person holding that device, because you recreate the biometric authentication on the device every single time.
Okay.
So it's always that link back to the original person, that originally you took to on board, and Apple doesn't help you on that.
Playing devil's advocate, sorry.
Of course, yeah.
But when I switch my iPhone, it just gives me this little bubble, and I scan with my new iPhone, and just passes everything onto my new iPhone. I have an iCloud account, and what I'm saying is,
I mean, we've got to be careful as well, though, with you're an Apple and an iOS user.
Yeah,
so customers have also got to think Androids are then using fingerprints, and it gets quite messy. And
I get that the Apple is much more consolidated as an ecosystem.
I recently switched from iOS to Android, and then
I'm sorry.
I'm very happy.
I'd say it's also very tied to the hardware of those devices. So there's a limited set of devices that you can use to have that protection, and not everybody has access to those types of devices, that level of security. So that's very much a key part of the iProov value is in ensuring that it's a very accessible system, not just from the point of view of any sort of bias, but actually in terms of devices. So we used across over 21,000 devices, right? Not all of those are Face ID or fingerprint capable, and so it's the fact that it's translatable and transferable across multiple devices, so you can use the same biometric across multiple devices, but also those devices do not have to be the top devices on the market. You can have a very, very old phone.
Yeah, I understand that. Last bit, I think. What you're all doing is amazing. Actually, I've used iProov. I said I was super excited about your presentation. I was wondering why every company in the world is not using that. You kind of answered it. But it goes back to, now we're going to have wallets. And the biggest wallet providers is Google and Apple, because they come with the device. And they have all this data about us. And biometric is a great signal. but then I was at this presentation like a few months ago, and somebody was saying, nobody cares who you are. They care about where you are, what you do, when you do it, because that's much richer in volume data. So like, you go back to Apple. I guess that's my question. I know we cannot answer it now, but since we started, it has the biometric and it has all this stuff tied to you. And then now there's going to be a wallet and it's going to store an ID, driving license. What stops them from saying, okay, now I'm going to put them all into the market as APIs? Because they're already doing APIs for ID verification. You've seen that, right, Apple? And how can we get together and use components of the tech to do something that is more open rather than two big players, Unanswerable. Sorry, I just wanted to finish the argument. But thank you.
A question from Lee.
Hi. I wonder if we've talked enough about price. So, since you're in the privileged position of some customers pay hundreds of thousands of dollars per day for OTP, is it a surprise that they're moving away from operator-based APIs for authentication? How do we stop the rot?
It's a really interesting question, and I think the MNOs have been slow to respond to that change, right? I mean, the reality is that what you saw with Adrian, this wonderful world, is still months and several months away because it requires every operator in the world to deploy an entitlement server. And guess what? They're not very cheap. So it comes down to a business case as to whether they will or won't. But the reality is that business case is paid for by the drop-off in one-time passwords. It just hasn't got to that place yet. And I think it really comes down to education as well. When you see it work just as it does, and when you show customers that it's seamless, really is seamless, it's a powerful thing. And as an industry, for once, we have to be a little bit thankful to Google because they've introduced this world of mobile-based authentication at the OS level, and they're the ones who are spending their, thankfully, millions on marketing that capability. That's something almost all of us couldn't afford to do, and they've started that journey for us. So now it will become understood by the user that, hang on, why can't I do this? And it started with RCS and Apple followed. It's likely to be the same thing. It's just we've got to get started on it. And the MNOs have been a bit too slow in starting that journey. And that's why we see this drop-off. We saw the drop-off towards OTPs through WhatsApp or other technologies. At least most of those in the room were able to monetize that in some way because you had the capability to provide those services. Oh, okay, you want to send it through WhatsApp, we're integrated. You can still send it through us. What's changing now, if that moves to passkeys or other, most of the CPaaS providers aren't in that space. And that's the door that's open. And thankfully, I think if Open Gateway and the operators keep going the way they are, they will catch up. It's just a question of, is it going to be enough in time?
Okay, right. Well, thank you very much for your questions and making it a lively last session. And thanks very much to our panelists for a great dialogue. Thank you.